Hi, my name is Ross Riddleston. Welcome to this Anson McCade Future series of webinars and podcasts. Today, with the help of some industry experts, we're going to be shining some light on the future of technology and business, with particular focus on diversity, skills, and working practices. Today, we're going to be speaking to co-founder and COO of Sense of Security, Murray Goldschmidt.
So welcome to our series of webinars. I'd like to introduce Murray Goldschmidt, co-founder and COO of Sense of Security, who's here today to talk about cybersecurity with us.
It's a great pleasure to participate in your webinar series. I'm a cybersecurity professional, having set up the business Sense of Security as a pure play information security and risk management advisory practice. We help organizations to identify security risks within their business, to take appropriate technical and procedural measures to protect the data that they hold of their clientele, their intellectual property of their business, and act as good corporate citizens in the market. So it's a great industry to be active in. As you know, cybersecurity is very prominent at the moment, and certainly an interesting place to play.
Yeah. Well, I hope you don't mind us picking your brain. Well, I'll get straight into it. Threats. Cyber attacks are often called an asymmetric threat. Why and what is the implication to the general public?
Well, the reason why I believe that cyber attacks are essentially titled asymmetric is because they're very difficult to defend against, yet quite easy for the attacker to establish. Compare sort of modern cyber warfare or cyber attacks against traditional warfare. Governments particularly had to invest a lot of money in hardware, military hardware, etc., in order to launch an attack against another entity. Whereas today, anybody can launch an attack against anybody else on the very interconnected internet that we live in. And due to the number of systems, network, people, companies, etc., all connected online, and the number of vulnerabilities that exist in the various protocols and applications and data that they share, it is a very low barrier to entry in order to create a cyber attack. And this is not restricted exclusively in the nation state sort of perspective when we talk about cyber warfare. I'm talking about just general day-to-day cyber attacks. It is not difficult to create a cyber attack or execute a cyber attack against an entity. Whereas on the other side, organizations have to protect against all the potential attack vectors that might be coming against them. And in this sense, it's very asymmetric.
Okay, and what are attackers looking for?
Well, generally, attackers are looking for things that they can monetize. And those things come down to information that is valuable. So attackers generally are looking for some form of data. Organizations that hold vast amounts of personally identifiable information, which has now become a very regulated area of the space that we operate in. In Australia, they've now released, mandatory data breach notification schemes relating to the potential loss of personally identifiable information. They do this because they know that attackers are looking for this information, which they can then on-sell. Other information that attackers are looking for are things like credit card details, obviously for the purposes of perpetrating fraud. Intellectual property is also a particular valuable source of money and data. And this could relate to, a very competitive landscape where instead of developing your own product, you might just hire some attackers to go and find the trade secrets of your competitor in order to create the product faster and take it out to market. So we're looking for data that is accessible, that has got a real value to it. That is a primary sort of attack motive. It's not the exclusive attack motive. Some attackers might be looking to attack another organization for the purposes of, some sort of political motive, and they might not necessarily be looking for data, but they want to make the headlines as some sort of political statement.
So what do you need to know about the data you need to protect?
Well, as I said, data has value. So you've got to know what that data is that attackers are looking for. There are generally a number of knows, KNOWs, that people and organizations should be thinking about. Know the value of the data. Why do they hold that data? Why would that data be valuable? If you think back to the types of data that I said are potentially cyber hacking, that is credit card information, Bible information, driver's license information, birth certificate information, dates of birth, residential addresses. All of those sorts of attributes and information could be used to perpetrate fraud, identity theft, cybercrime, etc. So firstly, know what value the data is that you have. Know where it is located. Data today is located in many different areas. It could be on a laptop. It could be on a mobile device. It could be hosted in some cloud service online that isn't even in your own premise. So you've got to know what the data is. You've got to know where it is. And then you've got to know who has access to that data. Is it publicly accessible, or does it require a username and a password to get to it? And if it is very sensitive, maybe you have to have a second factor of authentication to limit access to very sensitive information, such as the intellectual property of a business. And then you've got to know who's protecting that data and how it is protected. Is the data encrypted, for example? So encryption is a very good protective measure to protect data, but you obviously have to know where the data is first in order to be able to protect it. So you've got to think carefully about the ecosystem in which you operate in order to put appropriate security controls around the data that you're trying to protect.
I mean, that sounds like very complex. What are the current challenges of implementing information security or risk management systems commercially?
Well, most organisations today would have what we call a risk management system or an information. It's largely a procedural practice in an organisation that requires an organisation to know where their data is and identify risks and threats in their organisation. Now, those risks could be hacking types of threats against them. It could relate to sort of ransomware attacks, where attackers are encrypting your data and then requesting a ransom in order to be paid to decrypt the information. It could be supply chain risks. As I mentioned, a lot of organizations are now hosting their information with service providers out on the internet who they don't really have a warm relationship with. They're just paying for storage as a service or something. And so risk management really comes down to organizations identifying threats that would increase their risk posture or risk profile outside of their comfortable risk appetite. So firstly, an organization needs to know what their risk appetite is in order to trade successfully in the market, and they need to be able to identify risks that threaten their risk appetite, and then they need to put in appropriate controls to bring back those risks to within an appropriate risk appetite for their business. So it is largely a procedural activity, and one of the challenges would be, do you have the time, money, inclination, staff, and the actual knowledge to operate such a capability within your organization? And if you don't have it, then clearly you have to go out to market to seek assistance in that capacity.
So there are literally thousands of products available to address security concerns across open source and commercial. Where do you start?
Well, of course, if you go to any trade show or you security software products, as you said, there's thousands of them, and I'm sure any salesman would love to sell you the latest antivirus and the most current firewall. There's many different answers to what are the right products for an organization, and it comes down to what sort of an organization are you, to what extent are you insourced or outsourced, to what extent do you have expertise in your organization to operate and manage those particular products. If you don't have the expertise to manage them, it doesn't really matter which product you get, vendor A or vendor B, you won't be able to operate in your environment anyway, in which case you're going to have to look for some sort of managed service to take over the management for you. In the alternative, organizations often have to think about the difference between open source, possibly free software, or well-established commercial products. Generally, commercial products might be a little bit more robust. They might have more flexibility in reporting, and that is very useful for highly regulated entities, those who have to report at a certain frequency to an industry regulator. Whereas open source products generally require more engineering, more integration, and require the reporting might not be as sophisticated or detailed as a comparable commercial tool. So which is the right tool for an organization? It's hard to tell. Those organizations really have to answer those questions themselves. Do they need more advanced reporting? Are they prepared to pay a commercial price for a commercial product? Or do they want to tinker around the edges with a free or an open source product? So there's different answers for different organizations.
Right. And what technologies do you feel are most prominent within the cybersecurity space currently?
Well, in amongst those thousands of products, I suppose they would be broken down into different categories. Certainly, cloud-related products are very prominent at the moment, given the fact of the rapid rise in adoption, particularly of cloud technologies or technologies such as services and Microsoft. There is a huge marketplace for particularly security products that operate very well in cloud spaces. Now, those are very feature-rich environments which allow good interaction and integration through API technologies, API stacks that allow software vendors to get deep into the platform as a service. So there are many products now that can pick up a number of intricate settings within Amazon Web Services or within Microsoft's Azure. So there's a huge range of products there, particularly security related, particularly relating to the settings that are very dynamic and variable in public cloud. Now, those are very software-centric sorts of products. Your traditional sort of hardware products are probably waning at this point. If you think a few years ago, many organizations were rolling out large wide area networks, which required physical routers, physical switches, physical firewalls, and things like that. Those have rapidly transformed into more software-defined networks. But that doesn't mean that hardware itself is obsolete. There's a huge new range of hardware that is actually being taken out to the market today, and that we call IoT, or the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Everything, which could be internet-connected thermometers, internet-connected home automation devices, internet-connected building management systems. So there's a huge range now of special purpose hardware with special purpose software running on it, which has, of course, security implications as well. So to answer the question, what is the most prominent area of technology for cybersecurity? I'd say it's very wide. In fact, I attended the RSA conference, which is one of the industry's leading conferences in San Francisco last year, and there were over 700 technology vendors on the exhibition floor alone, just relating to security products in a specialist event, to give you an idea.
So, I mean, that's quite a wide space. What advice would you give someone beginning their career within the wider security space?
Well, as I said, cybersecurity is a great place to for us. It's very exciting. If I think back at my career personally, I valued very much the fact that I was trained around the fundamentals of information security before things like public cloud and fancy Android and iOS mobile devices became. I was trained around fundamentals of confidentiality, integrity, availability, understood the ways that the internet operates, and that revolves around internet networking protocols, domain name services, and things like that. If you understand the fundamentals of technology, you can then go and apply those to more modern things such as public cloud, which didn't exist when I was studying those sorts of topics. So got to think ahead. What would where's the security space going to be in the next 15 to 20 years? I still believe that focusing on the fundamentals and having good education around the fundamentals is going to put people in a great position to leverage that knowledge to whatever the new technology is of the day in the next 15 to 20 years. So if you were still at university, I would suggest, focusing on topics that relate to the fundamentals of security. That could be around networking and software development. For those people who are already out in the workforce, there are fantastic resources available today around all different aspects of information security. Most of the leading conferences publish a lot of their papers online. So if you're unable to attend the conference in person, you can always go to their website and download the presentations after the fact and really do a lot of learning from subject matter experts in the domain that you're interested in. In the Australian market here, there are a lot of groups, meetup groups and industry organisations that you can become a member of. Personally, I'm a member of the Australian Information Security Association, so that's a not-for-profit industry working group. The annual membership fee is a really nominal amount. I think it's sub $100, and that gives you access to all of the branch meetings that organisation would host, and they host them on a monthly basis in all the major cities. So for a very small sort of barrier to entry price of less than $100, you can go and network with really our Australia's industry experts in all sorts of disciplines: networking, operating systems, software, service providers, consultants, etc. And I think that would be a great opportunity to take somebody who's not really got the exposure around cybersecurity to interact with contemporaries in the marketplace at this point.
Okay, I mean, that sounds quite relevant to people who have got experience already also. Is there any other advice you'd give, say, IT professionals with experience that are looking to pivot their skill set into the cybersecurity space?
Well, I guess, cybersecurity is quite a wide area, as I said. Some people might be interested in risk management, some people incident response, some people might be in the nitty-gritty of reverse engineering, malware, for example. It's a very diverse space. So the first thing is identify what your area of interest is, and then extensively research that particular topic. As I said, today there's a huge amount of resource. You can go and watch, presentations from leading conferences on YouTube. You can go to a number of websites where you can, like slideshare.net, for example, where people post presentations and conference organizers post presentations relating to those conferences. So you can get a lot of this information for free without actually having to pay for an entry into a conference. Attending a conference in and of itself is a great way to network and interact with people and feel how you get stimulated around the different topics of discussion. But you don't necessarily have to pay to get that level of exposure. So in summary, my suggestion is that identify an area of interest that stimulates you, research it extensively, and then network with people in that space to be able to leverage their knowledge.
Okay, great. That's really interesting. What are the major risks, or major current risks rather, facing governments and business today with regards to cyber attacks?
Well, just by virtue of being connected on the internet, you're exposed to some form of people are scanning the internet all day, every day, looking for vulnerabilities that might be able to exploit. So as soon as a generally public exploit becomes available, attackers scan the internet to find companies that haven't kept up to date with the patches, who are susceptible to that vulnerability, and then to exploit them. That's the reason why we call the cyberspace a very asymmetric space to operate in. It's difficult to defend against all the attack vectors, where an attacker only has to find one successful vulnerability that they can exploit. So it's very asymmetric in that sense. The other thing that a lot of organizations are concerned about, what we call zero-day attacks. Now, if you think back to your traditional antivirus, for example, running on your desktop, those sorts of software are only good to the extent that the software manufacturer has identified the type of threat, created a signature for that threat, and then you've got to download the signature from that threat and actively run it on your computer in order to be able to protect against that threat. So the question is, what happens if you don't have a protection for a type of threat that is already out in the marketplace? Well, clearly you're susceptible and vulnerable to it. So this is what we call zero-day attacks. These are vulnerabilities that exist for which nobody knows what the fix is yet. In fact, nobody even knows that the vulnerability exists because nobody's reported it, which means that all organizations are vulnerable to it because they don't have a protection. So zero-day attacks are certainly something that most organizations are very, cautious about. And most leading organizations such as Microsoft, Adobe, Google, etc., have huge rewards for any person who can find a zero-day attack and advise them about it. They will make a substantial payment to prevent that attack from getting out and wreaking havoc in the general internet. Other forms of attack that most organizations are concerned about today are social-oriented attacks. And that's because you may have a firewall at your perimeter, you may have antivirus on your laptop, and those might be effective at some level in terms of preventing an attack from persisting within your organization. But people generally form the weakest link in the chain. So it's quite easy to pick up the phone and call the help desk and say, look, I'm sorry, I locked myself out of my account. Would you mind resetting my account? And they say, yeah, no problem. We'll reset it to welcome 123. And all of a sudden, the attackers trick the help desk person into resetting the account of the CEO, and they can log into their email with a password 123. So a social sort of attack is a very prominent attack. And in fact, social attacks are now almost always at least one of the attack vectors that cyber criminals are using, because it gives them an ability to get into the organization. Once they've executed an attack through a social means, they can then use fancy tools along the network and in the operating system once they've been able to access the system. So this really requires, vigilance across all aspects of the business, good user awareness training, and also, of course, good technical controls at the perimeter.
Okay, and where would you like to see future investments be targeted to mitigate cyber risk?
This is one of these areas, again, where it's pretty asymmetric. Most organizations fill their budgets with protective controls. They buy lots of firewalls. They buy lots of antivirus software. But you cannot protect against all forms of attack. So a better way to spend your money is to put reasonable protective controls in, antivirus and a whole range of other things, but also to boost your capability around detection and response. So there are generally three types of controls that we talk about: protection, detection, and response. Unfortunately, most organizations invest heavily in protection with very little investment in detection and response, which makes them therefore, of course, susceptible to persistent attacks which they never were able to protect against in the first place, like zero-day attacks. So we would like to see organizations identify when they have been attacked and then take real appropriate responsive measures to contain that attack so that it doesn't exacerbate within the organization. So my suggestion is investment in detection and response, not only in protection.
Right. And what could governments and businesses do to assist with the fight against cyber attacks?
Well, if you think about the terminology that the Australian government is promoting at the moment, they're always talking about cyber resilience. What does cyber resilience mean? And resilience really means that you'll never be able to protect against all forms of attack. Eventually, most organizations will be attacked if they haven't already been attacked. So it means that the resilient nature is do what you can against the attack, but should you become attacked, you have to be able to operate through the attack. You've got to be able to contain the attack, and you've got to be able to move on and maintain your business. without, losing complete control. So the Australian government is really great in promoting the idea about cyber resilience within our market. And particularly in defence of the Australian government, they do put forward a number of great initiatives. For example, our Defence Department in Australia has published what we call the Australia's top 4 and essential 8 techniques to avoid or mitigate cyber attacks. And they are very effective means. So if anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, just go and do a quick search on ASD's top 4 or ASD's essential 8, and that's the Australian Signal Directorate. And those will give you the top techniques to avoid and mitigate common cyber attacks. But also just think back to the fundamentals that I mentioned before. Understand what data you have, know where the data is, limit the number of people who can access that data, protect the data that you hold and that you store. Don't retain it for a longer period than you really need it, because the more data you hold and the longer you retain it for, the bigger your footprint is, and the more the worse that the outcome will be if there actually was a data breach within your organization. And of course, culture within the organization is also really important. So it is important from a top-down perspective for organizations to implement a good risk culture. That means that there should be a good appreciation of risk and a good appreciation of what it means to be responsible for holding the information of employees and clientele that you act on behalf of.
Okay, great. I've kept you talking a bit. So final question. What industry sectors do you believe will be most at risk in the next sort of 3 to 5 years' time from cyber attacks?
Look, I think all organizations, and I mentioned before, all organizations today are heavily interconnected. They're connected on the internet. They've got mobile devices which are connected on the internet. They go home to do work from home. They're connected to the internet. Well, so long as any entity is connected to the internet, they're always going to be susceptible. Those organizations that have got huge amounts of data are probably going to be the ones that are most susceptible to attack. So if you think back to the large data breaches in the past few years, Uber was attacked. Actually, they announced the attack in around November 2017, but the breach actually occurred in October 2016 and affected some 50 plus million consumers of Uber services. Why was Uber attacked? Because attackers know that Uber as a service provider holds a lot of personally identifiable information, not only of riders, but of the drivers as well. So there's information like credit card information, driver's license information, and of course there's a huge ecosystem of information about people, their movements, where they live, where they work. So companies like Uber are not necessarily in the taxi business, they are in the data mining business. And therefore their data becomes really attractive to attackers who want to be able to consume that information to monetize it. A couple of years ago, Yahoo also announced a massive data breach that resulted in the loss of credentials of essentially every person who ever held a yahoo.com email address. Why? Because that information is really valuable to attackers, because people reuse passwords. So of those hundreds of millions of email addresses that were compromised, a number of them, a good portion of them, would have used that same password for their LinkedIn account and their Facebook account and possibly their internet banking account. And so password reuse is really a great mine for a cyber criminal to get. If they can get hundreds of millions of accounts, they're going to have a huge return on investment there. So coming back to your question, which industry sectors are going to be those that are highly targeted? I would say those that hold information that can readily be monetized. And so, of course, all of the online players, all of the social media players, and any entity that holds personally identifiable information or intellectual property.
Thank you. That's all the questions we've got for you, Murray. Thank you. It was a really interesting insight in the challenges and opportunities around cybersecurity. So we'll round up there. Thank you again, Murray. If you'd like to find out more about Murray or Sense of Security, there'll be some links below. But that's it for our today's webinar on cybersecurity. So thanks for viewing. Thanks, guys.
Take care.